Good afternoon, Coolest Coast. Welcome to Coffee on the Coast. Good afternoon. Welcome to this episode of Coffee on the Coast. I'm your host today, Tina Prigge. Delighted to welcome as my guest international agricultural journalist, economist, and author Corey Geiger. Hi, Corey. So nice to see you.
Great to be with you, Tina.
It is a beautiful day here in Wisconsin. I love the fact that we're going to be talking about your books. And the reason that we're talking to you today is because tomorrow you're having an author event at the Manitowoc Public Library. It's happening Thursday, March 13th, 6 p.m. in the Bolkansky Room. Tell us a little bit, Corey, about your book and what people can expect at the author event.
Well, Tina, I'm a sixth-generation Manitowoc County farmer. At the present time, I don't live in Manitowoc County, but I am up there a lot. Our family farm is near Reedsville, Wisconsin, and I grew up on that farm and was immersed in activities in Manitowoc County. Believe it or not, when I was going to Reedsville High School, I left Wisconsin for one day trip until I was 18 years old. And since went to University of Wisconsin-Madison, became a magazine editor, and now an economist, and have traveled to 48 states and 12 countries around the globe. As I was writing about economics in other farm families and stories about Americana to the magazine that is published in 5 language editions, I learned this. Cows, there's a saying that grass is greener on the other side of the fence when we talk about dairy cows. I started learning in my late 20s and early 30s that the grass was pretty darn green on our side of the fence in Manitowoc County, and specifically our family farm. And that's when I started getting this idea of maybe writing a book. And I do say maybe for the first part of this, because something happened to cause me to go from maybe to yes.
Was it ever maybe that you were going to stay in farming and take over the farm, or you knew early on that writing was where it was at?
Actually, I didn't even want to go to school. I wanted to become a farmer instantly. And my mom and dad sat down. Dad literally sat down on a milk stool strapped to his butt in the barn when I was a junior in high school. And my mom and dad said that if you don't at least go get a technical college degree, you're not coming home on this farm, because they wanted me to get some extra skills. So I went to school to be a dairy science and an economist major. And through an internship I had my junior year, where the lady that was in charge of communications for a cooperative in Ohio was on maternity leave, I landed up writing the entire summer and found a new vocation. And with one writing course under my belt, landed up joining the editorial team of a publication called Hoard's Dairyman. Governor Hoard was the Wisconsin 16th governor, and he's the person who breathed life into what became America's dairyland, started the University of Wisconsin College of Agriculture, North America's first dairy science program to study cows, first food science program to study cheese, and then ultimately the nation's first genetics department, of course, to study cow genetics, not human genetics. But that was the place I went to and got to cover the global dairy industry for almost 3 decades.
That's so interesting. So you not only are familiar with Wisconsin's dairy industry, but the global dairy industry. You know, not knowing a lot about the global dairy industry myself, are there similarities, or is it quite different how the industries unfold in other nations?
Mm-hmm. So Wisconsin, the short answer, there's similarities and differences. Wisconsin's dairy industry, actually at one time we were the leading wheat state, as in grain in America, but our glaciated soils couldn't handle today the wheat production. We were losing soil fertility. And Hoard started writing about how we could have dairy cows use the manure to fertilize the soil. And he started this publication, Hoard's Dairyman, in 1885, and by 1900 it was circulating to 100 countries around the globe. These days, in 2017, I was in the middle of it all and led the launch of the Hoard's Dairyman Chinese edition, and had been going to speak in China twice a year until the pandemic. But eventually, Hoard, talking about how we could how we could have dairy cows in the state. He became Wisconsin's 16th governor in 1888. And people were actually, some were campaigning against him kind of as a country hick. But his supporters actually rang cowbells then at the campaign rallies and used it as a positive. And at the World's Fair in San Francisco, he was chosen as Wisconsin's citizen of the century for transforming the state, even over Bob La Follette. So coming back to your question real shortly, Europe's dairy industry would in many ways look the same. I've been to Hokkaido, Japan. It would look like landing in Wisconsin. Meanwhile, in New Zealand or Ireland, it would look like Wisconsin 1940, in so much that all the cows are on pasture because they get 90 inches of rain a year. It doesn't have snow in winter. You don't have to harvest feed. Then there's developing countries around the world that their dairy industries look a little bit more like pioneer Wisconsin. So I put everything in some spectrum of Wisconsin, but it's a different point of time.
Nice. Okay, so then you are going to be available and having an author event tomorrow, Thursday, March 13th, 6:00 p.m. at the Manitowoc Public Library. And specifically, you'll be talking about the book that you wrote, The Wisconsin Farm They Built, Tales of Family and Fortitude. And I understand there are some generational local tales included. Can you give us a synopsis of what you've written about in this book?
Mm-hmm. This book, both of them, On a Wisconsin Family Farm was the first one that came out in March of 2020, and The Wisconsin Farm They Built started out because young Corey at age 10, instead of going to play with his friends, would work a lot on the farm with Elmer and Julia, they're the couple in that picture behind me. They're my grandparents, and my grandma was literally born in the farmhouse and didn't leave there till age 62. But people will learn I have a photographic memory, and I remember stories and pictures and events. And that's that grass is greener on my side of the fence. When they were in their late 80s, I started asking them questions to dots I couldn't connect. I transcribed over 125 pages of manuscripts. I typed them in myself. They got to review them. Grandma labeled all her family archive pictures, put them under her bed, and said, they're yours after I pass away. But a lot of these events I go to, people say, our family has those pictures too, but we don't know who they are.
Oh, right.
Our farm turned 150 years in continuous family ownership in 2017, and our farm went through the women of our family. My great-grandmother was a landowner before women could vote. My grandmother was a landowner, my mom. And so I started a column in the Brilliant News, which is a newspaper on the Calumet Manitowoc line, and I promised 20 articles paired with pictures. And I narrated them so that I could bring people around. This story may be about our family, but I bring in people around us, what was happening in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin, and the world to these people at this time to cause them to make decisions. So 20 articles in the Brilliant News, weekly articles turned into 99. They sold copies of their paper to 37 states because people were interested in the history. I had neighbors saying, hey, why don't you go investigate this? And so it's been a journey. And so I put the two books together, and we're going to talk about some of the fun stories in there. The Amish community in Reedsville is even using this book in their school. And one of their favorite stories is a story about Uncle Tom and the copper cows of the Prohibition. And that will be one of the stories we talk about tomorrow night at the Manitowoc County or Manitowoc Public Library.
Will you have copies of your books available?
I will. I will have copies of both books. The first book has sold to all 50 states. So its epicenter is Manitowoc County, but the stories have gone around the U.S. and some countries around the world. And my newer book is very quickly approaching all 50 states, but the two copies together have sold over 8,000 already. So people are really finding these stories interesting. And there's over 70 pictures in each book. So they're just not stories, but they're stories brought to life through imagery.
And because your family's farm was local, it's quite possible that local folks might recognize some of the people in the pictures, the stories might really resonate with them.
Absolutely. This is a Manitowoc County story, and I shared off air. I showed at the Manitowoc County Fair 40 consecutive years, so know a lot of people in the area and certainly remain connected. The stories too, if something touched our farm family, I went and researched it. My grandparents were some of the original members of the Lake to Lake Co-op, which was an epicenter in Manitowoc. And the Lake to Lake Co-op started because two farmers for their local little processing plant needed a can washer to wash milk cans and a milk truck to haul milk. And that morphed into this idea, or blossomed, not really morphed, but blossomed into this idea of the Lake to Lake Co-op that transformed milk pricing in the area. Farmers got more money for their milk.
Wow. Wow. So I can definitely appreciate and see the value in collecting these stories, sharing these stories, making sure we remember these stories. Why do you think it's important that people familiarize themselves with these stories?
These stories, history can teach us, Tina. And these stories in these books are not all pom-poms about our family. I have stories about relatives that died of tuberculosis, have died of polio. And I wrote those to talk about COVID-19 and some of the things we've learned from that. Certainly headlines right now is a measles outbreak in Texas, unfortunately. There's also stories about community and collaboration. Some of these stories are triangulating truth. They're oral histories. Why? I've asked myself for years, why do fire trucks start out parades in our communities? There's a story about that in one of the books. And I believe it's because originally tax money wasn't available for fire trucks. These little villages, Reedsville, Whitelaw, Valders, St. Nazians, even Manitowoc and Two Rivers went out and fundraised to buy a fire truck. In Reedsville, they fundraised to purchase a 1927 REO Speedwagon and a Boyer fire apparatus. And back in those days, if you didn't have a fire certificate, they might not come out and put your fire out. And we'll talk about that as well.
What? Okay, wait. REO Speedwagon. I know the band. What does that have to do with? I think I have no idea why REO Speedwagon is called REO Speedwagon.
You bid on that hook there, Tina. So REO Speedwagon got its name because the band keyboardist was in his history class in 1970, and he saw the word REO Speedwagon on the board and thought it was cool, and that's literally how that band picked their name. But REO Speedwagon, REO stands for Ransom Eli Olds, as in the founder of the Oldsmobile Manufacturing Company, and he also made fire trucks. And Reedsville's REO Speedwagon was restored, and it's in their village museum. And back in those days, you would then go to get your REO Speedwagon from the manufacturing plant in Michigan. Then they would take it to Ohio and put the Boyer fire apparatus, which literally pump water. And eventually that truck made its way to little old Reedsville in 1927. And my grandparents and great-grandparents saved everything. I was blessed in that regard. And in our fireproof safe, I have a copy of the 1927 fire certificate that was issued as my great-grandfather was a donor for that fire truck.
So is that what you mean by a fire certificate? You had to contribute in some way to the firefighting efforts in order for them to fight the fires?
Absolutely. So Reedsville, population 600 in 1927, went door to door asking for $35 donations for this fire truck. They got done with that and they're like, uh-oh, we don't have enough money. So what we got to take ourselves back 100 years. Over half of America lived in rural areas. So the Reedsville village president and the fire chief went literally driveway to driveway, said, would you donate $35? And on that fire certificate to get the farmers to kick some money in, they said, if there's a fire in Reedsville and a fire in the country at the same time, we'll go to service the country fire first. But if you didn't have a fire certificate, that didn't mean they were going to come help you out either, because there was no tax money for that. Well, the world has changed already, right? And so that doesn't exist there. But I tell this tale in the book about them looking to the western sky and seeing that John Burich's farm's on fire. They came rushing out there, and they get there and they're like, they stopped at the driveway the neighbor's barn was on fire. And then a discussion, an argument took place of what they were going to do.
It sounds like your book is chock-a-block full of fascinating history. And I just want to say, Tim said, I was already looking forward to this program tremendously, but this REO Speedwagon trivia has really blown the roof off my interest.
It's how you can take little nuggets of history and put them together. When I get to the Uncle Tom of the Prohibition, one of the stories we'll talk about is copper cows.
Okay, yes, tell us more. I was gonna loop back to that actually. What is a copper cow?
Well, I just last month spoke at the Neville Museum in Green Bay, and that was one of the stories we let out with. And anyone who grew up on a farm know there's no such thing as copper cows. But the old timers would tell me the copper cow was the most profitable cow. So that was their nod to not a Holstein, not a Jersey, not a Guernsey, but 1 in 4 dairy farmers in Northeast Wisconsin, including Manitowoc County, had copper cows in the Prohibition. A copper cow was a still in the bar. And the Irish and the Germans and the Bohemians, we'd call them back then, today we'd call them Czechs, didn't believe in the Prohibition, and they just went about their business. And in Brown County, I talked about home of the Green Bay Packers. Curly Lambeau's best recruiting tool in the 1920s was the fact that Green Bay was as wet as ever. And the switchboard operators, the young ladies who ran the telephones, were in on it. So when the FBI would come and try to raid these places, they had a 2-hour head start because the ladies would never take their headsets off. Tina, you'd just plug in the cord and listen in, and then you'd alert all the bars. And the Green Bay Packers, in their 10-year vignettes of their history, almost brag about this during the 1930s. And the editor of the Green Bay Press-Gazette would invite people to his home. The bathtub would be full of booze, and they would, instead of having a press conference, it would be at his hotel or at his home. When he was on the road, he'd do the same thing at a hotel. But taking little nuggets of what happened with our family and then looking beyond my little home when I was that boy, and what else was going on that caused these people to do this? Why did my relatives break the law? Well, kind of everybody else was in on it too.
Well, and it sounds like the copper cows really would have helped local farmers navigate the Great Depression.
Great Depression and the Prohibition. And think about it. Everything to make beer or whiskey was on the farm except for sugar. And the cows could destroy the evidence. Cows will eat the mash with their rumens. They're great recyclers. And why was there so many milk routes in that era? Everybody was, I asked people of certain vintage, did you get milk delivered to you? And the hands all go up. Does anyone today? All the hands come down. Well, there was another reason for those milk routes, because it was a legal distribution route for what else was getting made on those farms.
We are learning so much today, and this fascination is going to continue because author Corey Geiger is hosting an event at the Manitowoc Public Library tomorrow, Thursday, March 13th, from 6 to 7:30 p.m. I think you're going to have lots of interesting stories to tell. You've got such a deep local connection. Do I understand that you're also even involved in Farm Wisconsin Discovery Center?
Mm-hmm. And I want to be clear, I don't live in the area, but I'm up there almost every week, working on our farm or visiting with people. And so through the board of directors who breathed life in what became the Farm Wisconsin Discovery Center, they invited me to be on the board of directors. But as you can tell, I travel a lot for work. I shared back with it when they asked, when you're ready for the fundraising campaign, give me a call. I will throw my whole heart into that. And so they invited me later to be co-chair of that fundraising campaign. And because of great donors and great connections and great relationships and people who believed in this idea, the campaign team, we went about and raised $13.5 million in about a year. And we told this story time and time again. So for me, the Wisconsin Farm Discovery Center has a very special place in my heart. When I go outside of our area, the Fair Oaks Discovery Center down in Fair Oaks, Indiana, which we modeled this after, I just tell people in dairy and ag circles that this is the Fair Oaks of Wisconsin. And it's a treasure to have it. in
It
Manitowoc.
really is. I wanted to say thank you to you and to everybody that helped bring this to fruition because it is truly a treasure here on the coolest coast. Such a great facility, so educational. I've gone a number of times and I learned something every time I go, including that I'd be terrible at milking a cow. Okay, Corey, one other fascinating fact that I learned about you, Fred Astaire. Tell us about your dancing.
So my wife and I, and more so my wife, she has a great sense of adventure. And our dancing journey literally started with a Groupon coupon. And my wife likes to dance. And at the time, I didn't. I'll be very candid. And I went there, and literally my first dance lesson was me swaying back and forth like a high school boy. But I could tell that my wife, Krista, was having a lot of fun. And so for Christmas, I bought some more dance lessons, and we kept this up as our date night. And over the course of a couple of years, we got kind of good. And our instructors were like, you should maybe compete regionally. Well, at this point, my wife's like, no, no, no. And I'm like, wait a minute. Tell me more, because I'm kind of a competitive fellow. And so we competed regionally and won our division as an amateur couple. So when you're dancing at a competition, you go out, there's 3 series of numbers for dairy farmers out there, us ear tags. But the 100 series is a professional male dancing with an amateur woman. The 200 series is a professional woman dancing with an amateur male. In the 300 series is 2 amateurs, man and woman. So we would be right out there with the semi-professionals, and you have to look like you know what you're doing. When the music starts, you got to go. These dances are about 60 seconds. Well, fast forward, we won our division as an amateur couple in the American rhythm category, which would be East Coast swing, West Coast cha-cha, rumba, and we also did a little bolero. I learned more about public speaking by dancing than I did anything else, because the last week before a competition, if you don't know your dance moves, you shouldn't have entered. And it's about posture, poses, Kodak moments, and entertaining and telling stories. But in dancing, it's telling stories through art and imagery than verbal.
That is so cool to know. And then is there a connection between your dancing and Family Feud? Did I read that right?
So again, my wife's sense of adventure, we went and applied. She applied, and we got in to have an audition with 600 other families. So it was a lot of families, but we made it through the multi-stage audition. But when they went to record us, how we introduce our family, as we're standing in the hallway, there's 3 women, they're all cousins. And then the 2 guys were married in. I would be married into our family. And I said, we all need monikers. And in an instant, I started telling everybody what their moniker was. And I said, I'm the dancing dairyman. And if they ask us to dance, you say yes. And so my wife was team captain. And we did that. And the other gentleman in our group was a bass guitarist for a band who's pretty good at singing. So he sang a song. We danced, and we made it on to Family Feud. We managed to take control of every question, Tina, and we managed to somehow lose, but we did that. But we danced in front of Steve Harvey too on Family Feud.
How cool. What an amazing story. Do you remember what the hardest question was that you had to answer on Family Feud?
Oh, I remember him to this day. You know, we got to the studio, and 9 a.m, they did some more auditions to kind of internally rank what families. We sat in a double wide trailer for 10 hours then, with no phones, no electronic technology, and they kept taping episodes. Then one family won the car, and they called our family next. And I think, looking back, they thought we would perform well and win multiple episodes. But one of the questions was, and granted, you know, you got to remember, I'm a farm kid here, even though I've traveled the world. The first question was, we asked 100 Americans, what do people stick up their noses? We got everything. Like, and I'm going to pause there because I'm talking fast. An episode, a 20-minute episode, took 2 hours and 20 minutes to record. Full studio audience. But Steve Harvey would ask me a question, tell a story. Then it would ask you a question. And that first one took 28 minutes to record what looked like 3 minutes on TV. But he's getting you to feel comfortable. And then the engine revs up. Tina, we asked 100 Americans what they put up their nose, 3, 2, 1, and you have no paper, no note cards, and all those kind of things. So we got the first one wrong because we left cocaine on the board. The other family stole it. Then we took control of the next question. And then the last question was that sunk our boat. We asked 100 married men, what would you rather do with your mother than your spouse? Cleared that too, except for one question. The other couple or other team came in and said snuggle. And I'm like, we're going to win this. Until it went ding. And there it was, snuggle. And I'm like, oh my goodness, we just lost. And as I was frustrated, now it's about 10:20 at night. Again, we've been there 12 hours. My father-in-law came up to me and he goes, we had 10 family members in the studio. Honestly, he goes, I'll buy all the drinks tonight. And I'm like, Pete, we just lost. And he goes, nope, I don't have to explain to any of my buddies when this airs why you're sticking cocaine up your nose and why you're snuggling with your mother. And I go, well, there's perspective. So Steve Harvey said, well, if we'd have had a rural audience, I'm sure you would have ran the boat, but you needed a little bit more city culture here. So that was our experience on Family Feud. We did get almost all the airtime because we were controlling questions. It was a bucket list thing that I never knew I wanted in the bucket, but I'm glad we did it.
Fantastic. Oh, Corey, thank you for sharing those stories. It's so authentic. You will be appearing tomorrow night. There's an author event with Corey Geiger at the Manitowoc Public Library, Thursday, March 13th, 6 p.m. He'll be talking about his book, The Wisconsin Farm They Built, Tales of Family and Fortitude, lots of good stories. Anything else we should let people know? And by the way, viewers, Corey will be our radio guest tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m. on WOMT radio. So if you want to tune in and catch more fascinating conversation, please join us for that.
One quick thing here, and that's going to be the lead story tomorrow night. So I'm not going to tell the whole story, but that picture, that black and white picture that's on the Wisconsin farm they built, was taken at the 50th anniversary of that Alice Chalmers being purchased by my grandparents by two Manitowoc County natives, John Shimon and the late Julie Lindeman, who is part of the Pine River family. And they took 3 versions of that picture. And the third version, it was really for Wisconsin Historical Society project. But how it came about will be the beginning of that book. And John now is actually a professor at Lawrence University and teaches photography. And that picture was taken on a glass plate camera, a Deerdorf camera, Civil War circa. But it was a wonderful evening that we took that, and I kind of hoodwinked my grandparents into showing up to take that picture. And I'm so glad I did.
How precious to have a Shimon and Lindemann like that. Wow. Very cool. All right. This story and many more happening tomorrow night at Manitowoc Public Library. So delighted to have my guest join us today, Corey Geiger. He will be at the Manitowoc Public Library tomorrow night, 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Corey, thank you so much for the great conversation today.
Tina, it's been an honor and a pleasure.
I'm your host, Tina Prigge. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Coffee on the Coast. We'll see you next time, everyone.